Hello and good morning, everyone. My name is Jillian Bender-Cormier. I'm Head of Culture with Bender Insurance Solutions. We want to welcome you to another educational Bender U webinar. Are you ready for Cal OSHA's latest mandate, SB553, Mitigating Workplace Violence? Some housekeeping notes. If you have any questions during the webinar, please feel free to type them into the chat box or in the Q&A section. We'd like this to be an interactive experience so our presenters can answer your questions in real time throughout the webinar. During our additional Q&A time at the end of the presentation, I'll be sharing other questions you might have with our speakers. We want to be conscious of time, so if we don't get to answer all of your questions, we'll gladly reach out to you individually after the webinar. You're all in listen-only mode and will remain muted throughout today's session. This session is being recorded. After the webinar, the recording link, as well as a copy of the slide deck, will be forwarded to you. We have an incredible set of experts sharing with us this morning, and I have the pleasure of briefly introducing both of them. Chad is Vice President of Construction Risk here at Bender Insurance Solutions. He has been helping contractors for 17 years with insurance and risk management solutions. He loves helping contractors elevate themselves to best in class. Jeff is the health and safety consultant here at Bender Insurance Solutions. He's been helping contractors for 10 years. He works with employers to develop their written programs, trainings, and OSHA citation support. I'll kick it over to Chad, who will start us off. Welcome, Chad.
Thank you very much. We're excited about this. First, we know that this is a new topic. This is a new bill, new law, and it's going to come with some OSHA regulations. But we want to start with this slide that says, of course, Jeff and I are not attorneys, and this information should be used for that purpose only, informational, and should not be construed as legal advice. So there's our disclaimer for you. What are we going to be talking about? We're going to be talking about the bill, the language that's in the bill. We're going to be talking about who this bill will affect, like what employers. We'll be talking about the different elements. So in the bill, it's elements A through M. I did the math, and that's 13 elements. So as some of you know, the IIPP, Jeff, the IIPP has 8 elements. Yep. And so this one has 13 elements that are required in this program. And we'll talk about those elements. We'll talk the best we can about how to implement those elements, because again, this is new. We don't really know how this will play out. Like the last bullet point there, what happens if you fail to comply? We don't really know until this stuff gets tested, until somebody gets cited and it ends up in court. And so unfortunately, that's the reality. We're just gonna walk through the bill itself and what's expected of you. So, Jeff, tell us about the bill.
Yeah, first thing I want to say, good morning to everybody. Thank you for all coming in on this. I know a lot of you I work with on a monthly basis, if not routinely. So this really, it helps us to explain this once to everybody instead of 50 different times. So I really appreciate everybody joining in today. We do have a lot to talk about with this. Like I said, this is all new. We're learning this right now as we go. We have basically what we're going to do, give an overall viewpoint on everything. So kind of backstory on this for those of you that are going, what the heck is this workplace violence prevention program? What are we going to have to do? So in September 20th of last year, Governor Newsom signed the bill in the law. So basically, backstory on this, we do have Senator, what's his name, Chad?
Dave Cortez.
Yeah, Dave Cortez out of the San Jose region. He's the one that first proposed this bill, and this was all back when they had the shooting at the transit station in San Jose. I think that was like 3-4 years ago. So they put the bill, it was finally adopted, signed by Governor Newsom, and it's going to be enforced by Cal OSHA. Okay. So yeah, there's a lot that is going to go into this. Okay, And like I said, we're going to talk about kind of what is going to be needed on it.
Yeah. So let's go into who's affected by this. Who's affected is virtually every California employer. There are some exceptions. And so on this screen, you can see that some of those exceptions are like healthcare, prison facilities, law enforcement. Those sectors are not subject to this bill. And what makes them different, the reason that they're not going to have to comply with this is they have their own regulation that they comply with. And it's actually been enforced for a few years now. It's not new to them. So these sectors already have something they're complying with, but all the other employers are going to be subject to this. There's a couple more exceptions we'll get to here. Another exception are those employees that work from home. So you have some employees who decided to not come back to work to the office and they're working from home. So they've chosen where to work. You're not going to be required to put together a program that makes their place where they work safe. You're not going to have to worry about that. So employees working from home is another exception. The final exception, this exception, if you read this, and I'm going to let you read it for just a second. If you read this, you might feel like, oh, we have less than 10 employees. We don't have to comply. But you have to read it closely. I heard someone say that this is almost a seductive exception because a lot of employers are going to try and fit into this. And that's fine if you fit. But I don't think it's going to be as easy to fit as you may think. Jeff, you have any thoughts on?
Yeah, especially with this, because the way that Cal OSHA is going to tie it in is even if you're less than 10 and something does happen that kind of constitutes that violence in the workplace, they're still going to tie it into the IIPP and they'll cite under that. And that's kind of what they've been doing, is citing under the hazard assessment portion of it. So they can tie it in and say that, well, you didn't do a proper hazard assessment of your facility that could have seen potential hazards or any kind of workplace violence. The other thing is, Chad, what do you think for something that's less than 10 employees and no access to the public, what company would that be? I can't really think of one because you're going to have deliveries probably, right? Mail's going to be dropped off. So there's access right there. So it's kind of, like I said, they're still going to hold you accountable for having an IIPP and making sure it's effective. So in a sense, you might not have to have the written program, but you still have to have an effective IIPP.
Yeah, and I think that not accessible to the public piece there is what's going to make that very difficult to be part of that exception.
Mm-hmm.
So just be aware of that, everybody, that there are some exceptions. You might be one of those exceptions, but to make sure that you're doing everything you can to protect yourself, because like Jeff said, they're going to cite under the IIPP if they can. All right, so when is this bill effective, Jeff? Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I know we got a couple dates on here. It's really, we're looking at Cal OSHA's, they're given the authority to enforce this come July 1st of this year. So it's having the written programs implemented by then, okay? The big thing on that is, as we saw, I think this was 2 years ago with what happened over in, where was it, Santa Cruz area at the mushroom farm they had, where an employee went in and shot, I believe it was 8 other employees. Cal OSHA got involved in that. They ended up citing the employer under the IIPP because they're saying that employees, they alerted the employer of potential hazards, issues with that employee. The employer failed to act on it. So they cited them under the hazard assessment of their IIPP. And I believe the citations were up to $100,000 on that.
That's pretty steep.
Mm-hmm. So this is one of those things, even though they're giving until July 1st, we do know that Cal OSHA is going to be out and enforcing this.
Yeah, and there are some, I think it's interesting when I look at this, the information on this slide, is that Cal OSHA is going to be enforcing the bill, the law that was just signed on July 1st. They're citing prior to that under the IIPP, like you said, but Cal OSHA then is required to put out their own standard. if you see at the beginning of this slide, it says the Cal OSHA Standard Board is supposed to adopt something by the end of 2026, but they're gonna propose something by the end of 2025. So they're gonna come up with their own standard, but right now and by July 1st, they'll start enforcing the language in the bill. So I imagine there's going to be some changes to this. They might add different things. They might change some of the language as they start to propose their own standard and as they adopt their own standard. But until that happens, we need to abide by this bill, the language in this bill.
Yeah, and the biggest thing, kind of to add on that, Chad, the SB553, it does give the requirements as to what needs to be in the written programs and the trainings and record keeping. So basically what Cal OSHA will do is adopt what that bill is and write it into their own standard. But yeah, come July 1st, I mean, that's where they're going to start asking for the written programs, training records, record keeping. So there's a lot of different elements that are going to go into this.
All right, so let's get into some of those new elements. So here's the first element. This is, and a lot of these elements are going to look like the ones you're familiar with in your IIPP. So this is just like the one in the IIPP where you have to name the person or people responsible to implement the plan, to update the plan. So they're going to be responsible for the plan. Now, keep in mind, if you have some changes in your workforce and Cal OSHA asks for this program and you hand it to them and they see that Chad Watts is the person responsible and they say, hey, we need to speak with Chad. Oh, well, we let Chad go 2 months ago. No good. This needs to have somebody somebody's name and title needs to be here that is in the company. If they find out that Chad was let go 2 months ago, you're going to be cited for not having an effective plan.
Yeah, they could get you that for usually a general or regulatory citation. I mean, that's a really easy one for them to pick up on it. You know, hey, where's Chad? We see that he's in charge of implementing this plan. Can we speak with him? He's no longer there. Well, your program isn't being kept up to date. So that's one of those things. You don't want to just get the written program and have it in a binder up on the shelf. You need to be actively involved with this and making sure it's staying current with changes. Yep.
All right, Jeff, tell us about this B element.
Yeah, so when we look at the active involvement with employees, right? Authorized employee representatives. So the biggest thing is that when you develop or put together your written program is they don't want it to just one individual sits down and drafts it together and throws it up on the shelf and says, hey, we got the program. They want to have actual employee involvement with this. So a lot of it could be maybe you have a monthly meeting set up, right? A safety meeting. So now this would be implemented into that monthly meeting by asking those employees questions. Hey, what are different hazards that you're seeing? Because a lot of times with clients, we see that maybe they don't have just one location, but they could be on multiple. Think of a distribution center, right? Where they have 4 or 5 different branches. Each branch is going to face different hazards. So really need to get with their employees and see, hey, what are you facing? What are some issues? How can we better implement and resolve this?
Yeah, and keep in mind, just that piece alone, this active involvement of employees, we have until July 1st when we have to have this document. But this active involvement of employees, it's going to take some time. You're not going to be able to just spend a long night in the office drafting it up. So you've got some time here, but don't let time slip by. Get your employees engaged, put together a team in your office, and how do we start drafting this? How do we start implementing it? And how do we get our employees involved as we do it? All right, the next element is coordination. So this one, some of you, a lot of you, are on job sites where there are multiple employers. Maybe a general contractor has a job going that you're on. And so this element involves other employers, coordinating the implementation with other employers. We're going to see a little later when incidents actually happen and how you have to communicate with those other employers. But this piece is just making sure that you have methods to use in coordinating and implementing this plan with other employers. So Jeff, what do you think? How do you think this will play out?
Yeah, because they say in SB553, they lay it out really for if it's a general contractor where you've got multiple companies working on one job site, is that you can, the GC itself can adopt and hold the written program, but it's making sure that you go over this with any of the other employers that are out there and the employees as to how they're going to report any kind of workplace violence issues, what are the emergency responses. So a lot of it, it's not just having that one plan, it's going to be customized to the job site, kind of like we see with, we do an emergency evacuation plan on jobs. So there's, yeah, like I said, it's laid out for general contractors, how they're going to comply with this.
Yeah. All right. We'll move on here to response, reports, and compliance. Jeff?
Yeah, so when we look at respond to reports of the violence, right, and effective procedures for supervisor, non-supervisor employees, the biggest thing is, well, you have to have a system in place for, so your employees know how, like if there is an incident, how are they going to respond to that incident? So it could be, let's say you're doing some kind of a customer center, right? Well, somebody walks in, poses a threat, your employee needs to know how to respond to that. Not that, but we see a lot, utility companies, right? They have guys that are going to service utility pole in the middle of nowhere. A lot of times they could be met with a homeowner out there with a gun at the gate. So they need to have a way of how do we respond with that, right? And then how do our supervisors handle that? They need to know as well. What do we do in those situations? How do our line employees relay that information? What do we need to get to them? So that really needs to be explained in detail in your written program.
Yeah, I think this also is a way, now this is touched on in another element, but how an employer is going to, like the employees need to know how to report these, right? Because this is procedures for the employer to accept and respond to reports. So they need to know how they're going to report these, how the employer is going to accept them. And again, all of these elements, this is language in a bill. We don't know how it's going to play out, and we don't know what OSHA is going to actually want to see. What's important is that you're reading the language in each of these elements, and you're putting together a plan that meets the obligation in each of these.
Yeah, we always got to think too, we look at effective, right? Effective, because they say a lot of companies get cited for their IIPP not being effective. Okay, so maybe they had an incident, but they didn't do a hazard assessment to determine a potential hazard, right? So they're saying it's not effective. We look at the effectiveness, especially with responding to reports, it should be written in your program that, Chad, let's say you hire me, right? And something happens, I need to be able to access that program and I can see step by step, who do I contact, what's their number, their email, what's the company reporting procedure? So how do I go through that? It needs to be pretty detailed out.
Yeah, I can remember many times just in the last week getting a phone call from a customer saying, an incident just happened, not workplace violence, but something just happened and I don't know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, like reporting a claim. And sometimes I'm surprised that they don't know what to do. But it's because they've never really gone through the steps in their mind. They've never prepared for it. And so you're right, Jeff, that this isn't just a written document, that we actually need to go through the process so that these new employees or any employee and management knows the process, because we don't want to get caught not knowing what to do in these types of situations.
Mm-hmm.
So that effective, when you see that word effective, it is so important, because if you're not doing something you should, they're going to deem it non-effective. All right, the next couple of elements, or this next element, is about how you're going to communicate these procedures. These are the procedures to communicate with your employees. Some of the things you have to communicate is how an employee can report, right? So how they report the incident to either the employer or law enforcement. So that needs to be spelled out. They need to know how to do it. And then how the employee concerns will be investigated. and then how the employees will be informed of the results of the investigation. Right, so they spell out what you need to communicate to your employees. This is important, the effective procedures to communicate. So this is where you're going to put, we're going to communicate in our tailgate meetings. We're going to communicate in safety committee. You're going to decide in your organization how you communicate these items. There should be a lot more you're going to communicate, but this is what's required in the bill, that you're communicating these two things.
Yeah, one of the things too, and this is something that kind of from a law stance, because I was reading up on something, what they're saying is when you're doing these investigations is, because there are going to be recording requirements, kind of like a log 300, which we're going to talk about, but one of the things they're saying is, as far as who does the investigation, right? And then who's notified of it, because a lot of this comes into privacy concern, right? Maybe it's more of a sexual assault, right? That you're not going to go let the whole company know what happens. So you've got to be very careful on that. And two, when we look at results of the investigation, okay, what's written in that, it could be almost admittance. So in a sense, you do want to be careful what is put in there. So it's saying, hey, this is what happened, this is what we did to correct it. That you might, if it's something on a more serious level, you might want to get with your attorney and kind of look at it that way, so that you're not putting yourself in a bad position.
Yeah. And another thing I want to point out on this slide, if you look at F1, at the end of that, it says without fear of reprisal.
Mm-hmm.
So how your employees report, they need to feel safe doing that they're not going to be, there's not going to be any kind of repercussions, negative repercussions towards them. So they need to feel safe reporting these potential incidents.
Yeah, and that too, it's kind of redundant too, what they have, labor law, whistleblower rights. So they just put it in there though.
Yeah. All right, the next one, now this one is communicating. The next one is more about how you respond to those incidents.
Yeah, and when we look at response, right, you have to think it's really, these programs have to be customized to what that company is doing, the locations they're at. If you have delivery drivers going to different parts of town, daytime, nighttime, in those procedures, how are they going to respond to any kind of an issue? Because we've seen now, there was one case I read, the guy, delivery driver, and there was another guy he was in a stolen vehicle, crashed, got out, held that guy at gunpoint, shot him, stole that delivery truck, and it was still work related, right? So yeah, I mean, a situation like that it's very unfortunate, but you need to go over with your employees, how are you going to respond to something like this? What are you going to do if you're at a place where customers come in and somebody comes in very upset? What are the procedures going to be for that? How do you alert other employees, right? I mean, that comes into our evacuation drills. You should be doing emergency evacuation drills once a year, just to make sure every employee understands and knows what is their role. We did one once, Chad, where we held an emergency evacuation drill. We didn't tell anybody we were doing it, and it took them over 30 minutes to get everybody out. So, at the same time, a lot of people, they didn't understand what was going on. Why is there this alarm? People are going, hey, we got to get out. Where are we going to go? So it's really important that you do go over this and that your employees understand and know and are able to get input. Hey, this is something that we think could be a little bit better in this situation. That's really what they want to see, is the employees are engaged in this as well and helping make it a customized program.
Yeah. Yeah, there was an earlier element where we had to respond to some of the hazards. This element specifically is like Jeff said, those actual incidents where there is an emergency. They need to know what to do, how to do it. This is the action in place. So that's what you're spelling out here in this element is how to respond to those actual emergencies. Our next element is the training element. So all of those things that we just talked about, you're spelling out. Now you have to have a way to train. And you have to have someone that knows how to do that training. So our next few slides are going to talk about what's required and how often you're supposed to train. Now, Jeff, Does SB553 require employers to provide training to all employees regardless of the state they're in?
So as of right now, this law only applies to California. Okay. So I know some of the clients on here are working in different states. Okay. As of right now, they don't have to do anything. Say if you're in Nevada, Arizona, okay, states of such. But just know that federal OSHA is most likely to adopt this standard within the upcoming years. It's just a matter of time when they do. But as of right now, it's only your employees that are in the state of California need to have training on your written procedures.
Yeah, and I think if you're developing a plan for your California employees, it just seems natural to extend that to any employees working out of state. I think that's a good idea to make it go company-wide. But to answer the question, not required. It's only required for California and California employees. Okay, so now some of the training requirements, Jeff, why don't you walk us through this?
Yeah, so as far as when do you need to train your employees on this? It's whenever it's your workplace violence prevention program initially established and then annually thereafter, right? So that's the biggest one is things may change, right? If it's something does change in your policy, you need to retrain your employees. And the biggest thing is that on this, okay, and we see this in different standards like heat illness, okay, where it's not sign this paper, we'll file it away, and yeah, you're good, you have the training, right? Cal OSHA may come in and they may start talking to employees, kind of like what I said they do with heat illness. Hey, do you know where your written program is? Do you know how to access it? Hey, do you understand what workplace violence is? Hey, what are your reporting procedures? So it's really important that your employees know and understand what this is instead of just that, hey, like we see a lot of times, right? Hey, here's what workplace violence is, sign right here, okay, we're good. It's gonna be a little bit more than that.
Yeah.
And this is that one where we look at Cal OSHA, right? We see it, they could come in and ask, hey, where is your written program at, right? And it could be, you have a certain time frame to procure it to them, as well as the training documents. In a lot of this, we look at the record keeping, right? They want it up to 5 years of record keeping. So for your hazard assessments, for your training records, for your record keeping. So if they're requesting 5 years worth and you don't have them, you could be in a pretty tough situation.
Yeah. Now walk us through this checklist of training requirements. So you told us how often and when we need to train, but what do we actually need to train on?
Yeah, so some of the big things, right? First and foremost is how can employees obtain a copy? So not only employees, but it could be your representatives, union representatives. They all need to know, how can I get a copy of the plan? A lot of companies too, they may upload them online and then let every employee know, hey, this is where our copy is. Or it could be a hard copy if you're a single location. It really just depends on what you're doing and what's going to work best. We see a lot online now, so that's totally fine. Have to go over the SB553 definitions and requirements. So kind of what is the differences of workplace violence, right? What exactly the different elements in our program are. Those need to be relayed to all employees. Then we look at reporting incidents. Okay, that's the biggest one, is that they need to know, or employees need to know, what are the types of violence and what constitutes needing to be reported, who to report that to, information that's going to be taken down. Okay, and then go over specific workplace hazards and measures to prevent. Okay, as a state, even in your IIPP, you have to do periodic hazard assessments, whether those be weekly, monthly, quarterly, annually. Same thing is going to apply to this. You're going to show how often you do your hazard assessments. Okay, so when you do go through those, it's relaying to your employees, hey, these are potential hazards that we've noticed. This is how we can mitigate those. Whether it be having key cards to get in to an office building, or sign-ins at job sites, making sure that anybody coming into the job site, they go into the trailer, they check in for different things like that.
Yeah. I want to point something out, and I apologize I didn't point out earlier. In the bottom corner, you see a link and like a section of this. That is the link to this bill. So you could actually go to this bill and you'll see all of this that we're talking about. But on each slide, I kind of put what section of the bill we're in. All right, sorry to interrupt there. So let's move on to the next two training requirements.
Because we're not done with the training requirements. The other one for record keeping requirements, employee access. Like I said, they do have a specific record keeping, kind of like a log 300, but it's a little bit more beefed up. It's almost like a police report when you look at it. Okay, but employees, and that's the other one, is it's really depending on what the incident is. Some of those, it might be that privacy concern where you don't want to bring it up to the employees, but at any time they could ask for record keeping requirements. The big one on that is OSHA is going to ask for those if they do come into an audit. I can already see that happening. And then we look at the last, giving an opportunity to employees for questions, answers, and having that knowledgeable person on your staff that is up to date with your current program, the requirements within it, that they can ask any questions. Because remember, Chad, when we talked about the 13 elements, one of them is listing on there that individual who's responsible for your program. So it's making sure that they don't just know that, yeah, we have the program, it's on the shelf, but what are the elements in it? What are the different things? So your employees can go to them and ask those questions and get actual answers from them.
Yeah, right. Thank you. So now we're going to go back into our program requirements into element I. Element I, this is the analysis. You're analyzing the hazards here. This is where you're going through your organization, you're going through your job sites, you're going through your warehouse, your offices, and you're identifying potential hazards for workplace violence. This is an important part of just the risk management process, right? The analyzing. So you're gonna identify and evaluate each of those hazards, and then you're gonna put together ways to prevent workplace hazards.
Yeah, and one of those, Chad, when we look at for the identifying evaluation portion, right, is because I'm sure a lot of people are wondering, well, who's going to do that? How are we going to do that? There are checklists, right? And I looked through the written template that we have, and there's a whole section on that, and I think it's 4 pages of different questions that would be asked as far as entry points, where are employees working, emergency exits, are they open, are they blocked? And if this is one of those things that, you know, companies that they don't feel comfortable doing, they want a third party, that's where it can come in and help them out with that.
Yeah,
doing that actual assessment, kind of like, hate to say it, but with COVID, how we did those evaluations at different facilities, and kind of be the same thing.
yeah, cool. Okay. This is the correcting of hazards. Jeff, tell us about this one. I mean, this one's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, and that's kind of goes into along the lines of the IIPP is, you know, you as an employer must provide a workplace free of foreseen hazards, pretty much. So it's doing those hazard assessments periodically, and then I mean, if there is an issue, the biggest thing is that document it and show what was done and correct it, so that you have something that shows, hey, our safety program is effective. We identified, we corrected, here's the outcome of that.
Yeah, and this just is going to spell out that process, that when a hazard is identified, this is how we correct it. This is the chain of command, and this is who's going to be responsible. Yeah, this is just the step-by-step of how you do it. Element K here, the procedures for post-incident response and investigation. So the investigation process, I imagine this will also be similar to like an IIPP investigation process. What do you think, Jeff?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And the thing is, they're going to want to see the records of that, because like I said, when OSHA comes in, they may ask for that 5 years worth of record keeping, and this would be part of that. Hey, where are your hazard analysis forms that you've been doing?
Yeah. All right, we're getting to the end of the program requirements. Element L, this is the 12th element. And this is where you have to regularly review the effectiveness of the plan. So you might have to make revisions. You might need to add new things to the plan. We might eliminate some of the plan because that work site is no longer, we no longer have that work site. So this is where you need to be reviewing how effective your plan is, making sure it's still applicable to your work environment. You might purchase new places to work. And so you have to develop a plan for each of those sites. But this is just the element that says you need to be reviewing this, right? At least annually, it says here in the standard.
Yeah, and kind of one of the other things on that, like companies should be reviewing their IIPP on an annual basis as well. And I would say put the date on there that it was last reviewed so you can keep track of that. But don't get in the habit of just, hey, we have the program, it's on the shelf, and then somebody comes and asks to review it, and they go, hey, this hasn't been looked at in 3-4 years. Could become problematic. You might have changed operations. It should have been reevaluated. Discussing that with all your employees. So that's when they really tied into that effectiveness. Is it effective, or is it just another program on the shelf?
All right, element M, Jeff. The procedures and other information.
Yeah, and this is where it's just the last element in this out of the long list of things that they want to see done. But it's listing out, employee access, your incident log, record keeping, and then anything else proposed by the standards boards. Like we said, and this is something we saw with COVID, right? They changed that regulation every, I don't know, a couple times a year that they updated it as things kind of progress. So same thing with this. It's a bill. Once they put it into OSHA regulation, it does get open to public comment. So they may make changes. Same thing as once incidents come out and it goes to litigation, they may revise the program to fit what is actually occurring, especially when we look at the record keeping and the incident reporting procedures. So those are going to be big ones.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to move into now talking about some of these bullet points. We're going to go into the violent incident log. This is something that they're going to require you as part of your record keeping, so that when employees report these incidents, you have the correct detail in that log. So the violent incident log, here's what's required in the log. You have to have the date and time and location of the incident. You have to list the type of incident it was, and you'll see that there's 4 potential types. Type 1 is a workplace incident committed by a person who has no legitimate business at the work site. Okay, so this is a type of incident where that person had no reason to be here. A type 2 incident is directed at employees by customers, clients, patients, students, inmates, visitors, right? So it was somebody who would normally be there and an incident happened with one of your employees. Type 3, this would be like this is an employee by a present or former employee. So not just like employee on employee, but it could be a former employee or a former supervisor or manager. Type 4, this is committed by a person who does not work there, but has or is known to have come to the place of business, maybe a relationship to the employee, a spouse or a significant other or a child. So there's 4 different types of incidents that need to be reported or at least identified on this log. Then we need to have a detailed description of the incident. We need to know who committed the violence. You need to know the circumstances, the time of the incident, including whether the employee was completing usual job duties. So they want some detail on this. Then they want the location of the incident. So we're going to go over in the next slide another requirement that has other types. They're going to be different types. So these 4 types, the type of incident. They also want to know the type of incident, whether it involved physical, verbal, sexual, or animal attacks. So the type of incident. You could have 6 potential types. Those include, so type 1 is without a weapon. So without a weapon, but it could be like biting, choking, grabbing, hair pulling, kicking, punching, right? So this is the type of attack without a weapon. That's a physical attack. The type 2 is an attack with a weapon. So with a weapon, they identify like a firearm or a knife or another object. Type 3 is a threat of physical force. This one's going to be interesting, huh, Jeff? That just the threat is a violent incident. Type 4, this is a sexual assault or threat. They list rape, attempted rape, physical display, or unwanted verbal or physical sexual contact. I think some of these descriptions are pretty broad, that it could bring in a lot of potential types of violence when you're talking about verbal or unwanted. So keep that in mind, that this could get pretty broad. A type 5 incident is an animal attack. We see this. I have some clients, they do some door-to-door stuff and a dog might bite them. That's considered a violent incident. And then type 6 is going to be other. So if it doesn't fit into one of these, then you're going to put it under type 6 other. You're going to have to list consequences of the incident, right? What kind of medical treatment, what kind of security or law enforcement was involved. And then you're going to also have to have the contact information of the person completing the log. So they want to know who filled out this log, because they might be looking at it years down the road, and they need to know who filled it out and be able to get in touch with them. Any comments on this one, Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, that's where it looks like a full-on police report is what they want to see done. But this is what they're requiring, right?
Yeah, and we're going to see a little bit later in the record keeping section that we're going to get into, that when we fill this stuff out, we have to make sure we're keeping some private information private. We want to make sure that people's identities and sensitive information is kept safe and secure. All right, so let's get over to the record keeping.
Yeah, and we look at the record keeping, right? The biggest thing there, you got to keep record of this for 5 years. So that's where if Cal OSHA does come in, they start asking questions. They want to see a copy of your written program, your record keeping for any incidents. Okay, they're going to ask for 5 years worth, and it's what we see with the log 300s. Those are it's a little easier to throw those together, but a lot of times with clients that they're not keeping up on those, OSHA comes in and they go, hey, we want your 5 years worth, and they're calling me and scrambling, trying to put them together. It's better to be prepared, guys, to have these and make sure know where they're at, where are they stored, who's maintaining them. Those are all really important things.
And there is a different time element for some of the different, I don't want to say element too much. There's going to be a time frame for some of the different elements. So this 5-year maintenance of records is for the hazard identification, evaluation, and correction. So you need to have 5 years worth of data of you fulfilling those elements, the hazard identification, evaluation, and correction. You're going to see here that, like your training records, you have to hold on to those records for 1 year. And then your violent incident logs you have to hold on to for 5 years. And then we have one more time frame for actual incident investigations. So another 5-year time element here.
Yeah, it's a lot of recording procedures and requirements on here.
Yeah, and storage. And storage. 4 and 5, record keeping. So this is where all records required by this bill, the division, OSHA, might ask for this, and they might want to examine them, right? So you have to have it available to them. And then element 6 here is if an employee or their representative requests copies, you have to provide it within 15 calendar days of the request. All right, so those are some of the record keeping requirements, or those are all the record keeping requirements in this bill. Jeff, the question that everybody wants an answer to: what if I don't comply with this? Like, how serious do I need to take this?
Well, look at past incidents, right? Because we're going to go back to the mushroom farm. What happened? I mean, Cal OSHA came in, they cited the company, was it like $100,000? But not only that, there's a class action suit against that company for, I believe, $15 million for their failure to protect employees. So a lot of this is in what we've seen in other incidents when it becomes something of a fatality, right? It's usually the owners. I mean, they're facing serious penalties, jail time, Same thing with managers, supervisors that are there and present or knew about it. Okay, they're going to be held accountable for that as well. So this is, if there's an incident at your facility, right, you need to take it serious and don't just brush it off. It can't be one of those things, because we look at time and again of I hate to say, but the active shooters, right? A lot of it, they interview all the employees and they find out, hey, we saw this, we told management about it, we've been telling them for the last 3 months, nothing was done, right? That's where it turns into a much bigger situation that you want.
Yeah, and if you think about some of those types of incidents, we're talking about some stuff that's we might usually brush off. Somebody said something, somebody made a threat. Well, did anything happen? No. Okay, it was just a threat. But that stuff is all brought into this bill, this new standard. And so we have to pay attention. We have to do what we can to keep these people safe. And again, we don't know how this is going to change. We only know what's in this bill. So if you just wait, you might really find yourself scrambling. I would, and it's kind of some of our concluding comments here, I would make sure you start on this now. Start developing or start thinking about who's going to be on your team to begin fleshing this program out. How are you going to get employees involved? And how are you going to start it sooner than later? So that when the bill is finally done, and we have to be, we're going to be held accountable to it July 1st, this written program. We don't want to be scrambling. And I said in accountability, these written programs, they're not a bad thing. It's actually a good way, in my opinion, it's a good way. It's what you're accountable to. You can show your employees, we care about your safety, right? They're forcing us to do this written program, but we're doing it. We're going to embrace it. We're going to do everything we can to keep you safe. We want your input, and we're all going to be accountable to this written program. That accountability piece is huge in any organization, and this is just another way to create some accountability around safety and workplace violence.
Yeah, one of the other things I would add on here is that OSHA they do give the option in this bill to implement it into your IIPP, but I highly recommend keep it a standalone program, right? The reason being is they did the same thing with COVID. You can implement it in your IIPP, right? Or you can have it as a standalone program. The thing is that when OSHA does an audit on a company, they always request a copy of the company's IIPP, right? If you give them just that, they're only going to reference what you have in your IIPP. But now if you have included in there your workplace violence prevention program, they might go, oh, well, is the name here current? They start digging into that. They could ask for records, even though they didn't want to see that initially. So it's always a smarter idea to keep it as a separate program. That's one of the things.
I actually have a question for you.
Yep.
This person says, we have an ex-temp employee who calls our supervisors and says homophobic and racial slurs, but doesn't threaten them. The police say that there's nothing that they can do unless he threatens them. Is there anything we need to be doing? These are company provided phones.
I mean, that sounds like it turns into either a harassment case. Yeah, that's one where you might want to get legal advice on.
I'm surprised law enforcement isn't doing anything. In my opinion, it falls into this type of program. And as we saw on some of those elements, that a type of incident, this could fall into one of those types. I feel like if you're involving law enforcement, you're doing what you can. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. And again, this isn't legal advice, but if you're doing what you can, there's not much more you can do. Yeah, I wish we had an answer for you, but
yeah, it's one of those things. I mean, I look at that's a blatant sexual harassment case, right?
Yeah. So yeah, I wish you the best of luck with that. But I mean, I think this does fall into this type of program, but I don't have an answer as to what you should do next. I'm sorry.
All right, thank you so much.
All right. So that's the conclusion of our presentation.
There's a lot to unravel on that.
And there's going to be more to come. Again, This is January. This just was signed into law in October, and it's effective in July. So we have time. I wouldn't waste time, but watch for some updates. Watch for some updates.
And like I said, anybody on here, if you need help with getting the written program, right, we do have templates that we can help get you. They're almost finalized. And it has everything in there as far as reporting requirements, hazard assessment forms, the actual written procedures. Same thing if you need help setting up trainings, right? If you want, I'm here to help you guys is what it is. So we'll be looking at that over the next couple months, getting this implemented for those of you that are currently working with me. If not, please reach out to Chad or myself. We can get you set up with what you're going to need.
Thank you so much. And we did, I had received a comment about people that are eager to get started on this. So I think that you've really inspired a lot of people today. We do have another question, and please remember, use the Q&A section. I'd love to see some more questions come through. Somebody asked, can we store our records electronically?
Yes. Yeah, as long as you have access to it, there's no issue with that. That's what a lot of companies do as well.
Okay, perfect. Another question, does each work location need a dedicated plan, or can an organization use a corporate plan for all of their sites?
Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, so on that one, I mean, you look at when we develop a corporate plan, right, and you have different locations, each location is going to have different hazards based on where they're at, what are they doing, where that plan is it's going to really need to be customized to that individual location.
Okay, all right, perfect. Do workplace violence incidents also go on the Occupational Safety and Health Administration log of injuries and illness, the OSHA Form 300 log?
Yeah, so if it's injury related, then it does get filed on your log 300.
Okay.
But if there's no injury, then no.
No. Yep.
Does the SB list and define the different types of incidents?
It does, yeah. So in the bill itself, you'll see the definition of each in each incident type. And
okay.
yeah, so if you go to that link on the bottom corner of those slides, you'll see that entire bill. It's long. You'll go to, and I even list the section and to help you try and find it easily. But if you go to those sections, and I can help you, just give me a call. But we can see those types listed out in that bill.
Yeah, and as a reminder, the slide deck will be emailed out to everyone, so you'll be able to click those links. Can the hazard assessment for workplace violence be included in a JHA or JSA, since we have changing work locations daily?
I don't know. That's a really good question, and I can see what company that applied to. Where yeah, they change. I mean, every day is going to be a different thing. That you might be able to word that into your actual written program as part of it. Yeah, and this, like I said, it's very, very new, so we're kind of
we don't know how it's going to shake out.
Yeah. But I think that I think it would be on the right way of doing it to have that in there, because if you're dealing with unruly customers, homeowners, landowners, stuff like that, where you're walking onto a place you don't really know anything, they don't know what you're doing out there. Yeah, it could be a good idea to have that.
You know, I see this naturally fitting into a lot of what we're already doing with hazard assessment.
Mm-hmm.
It's just now we're assessing specific workplace violence. So I don't think that this has to be a separate process. It could very naturally fit into the same process. But you want to make sure you're specifically addressing workplace violence, in my opinion.
Perfect, thank you. Another question. This is the last one that's come through. So if you have any lingering questions, now's the time to send them. When identifying who is responsible for the plan, can we identify positions versus people? For example, an HR manager versus an actual name.
No, you need to list the person.
Name.
Yeah, you need a name, and you should list their position as well. So I would say name, position, and a way to contact them, either an email or a phone number.
Yeah, because if it's a big corporation, let's say it's a big corporation, Chad, I'm brand new, and I'm just told, oh, go see the HR person. Who's that?
Yeah.
How do we get a hold of them?
Right.
Okay,
It needs to
perfect.
be specific.
All right, well, those seem to be the bulk of the questions that have come in. But again, folks, if you have questions that pop up after the webinar has wrapped up, that tends to happen, please reach out to us and we'll be happy to help you. Thank you, Chad and Jeff, for sharing with us today. This was a wonderful session. Next up for Bender U, Wednesday, February 14th, Valentine's Day, we have Construction and Contract Employment Law Update for 2024. This is always a hot session. It's a hybrid session, meaning we're offering both in-person or virtual attendance. So whatever works for you. If you scan this QR code with your phone, you'll be able to go right to the registration page and get signed up. We'd love to see you there. We appreciate you all for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us for today's Bender U. As a reminder, this session has been recorded, and both the recording link and a copy of today's slide deck will be emailed to you following the webinar. Should you have any questions, again, please reach out and we'll be happy to help you. Thank you again, and we hope you all have a wonderful day. And thank you, Chad and Jeff.
Yeah, thank you.